Hi, I'm Courteney Donaldson, Managing Director of Childcare and Education at Christie Co, and I'm joined today by Purnima Tanuku, Chief Executive of the National Day Nurseries Association. Purnima, thanks so much for joining us today, and we're here to discuss activity over last year and the outlook for the year ahead across the UK early years day nursery sector. So I'm conscious last year we worked together so closely on a number of projects, but the highlight of all of those projects was the blueprints reports. Tell me about why NDNA decided to commission the roundtables and prepare that blueprint report, which Christie Co was so delighted to support.
Thank you, Courtney, and glad to be here today again. And yes, absolutely. I think, leading up to the general elections, we really felt that we needed to bring together organizations from different backgrounds to be able to see what the challenges that they see it as, not just NDNA, and what it is that we need to prepare for in terms of moving forward. And so we brought together around 25 organizations, think tanks to academics to other childcare organizations, so wide variety of organizations. There was so much consensus from everybody in terms of what needs to be done and what needs to change, and most importantly, putting children at the heart of the government policy. And so we made about 10 recommendations in that report, and all absolutely fundamental to early education care and moving forward, and most importantly for the sustainability of the sector as well.
I think the reason why we were so keen to support the NDNA in producing that report was, as you rightly say, all of the pressures that the sector has seen, particularly over last year, starting with all those significant workforce challenges and just the general economic climate we saw last year in terms of increased operational costs, ongoing conversations around the level of funding available from DfE, and also that further surge in the NDNA reports of closures. So a further 50% increase in closures in that 12 months up to autumn last year. It's worrying to see the loss of capacity in the early years sector as the government now have actually embarked on the rollout of extended support by 30 hours to families. Tell me, in terms of the member issues that you're encountering on a daily basis and challenges around sustainability, what are you hearing from your members and how are NDNA supporting members through this difficult time?
It's a mixed feeling from providers because, of course, we want to see the expansion and, of course, impacting on number of more children and, of course, families, because it's a great support for families and children, not only from working families getting back into work, but also for children, for their learning and development. But I think the biggest challenge is even if providers want to expand, they haven't got the staff. And they were struggling before, and now the expectations from parents is that they're going to be able to get a place near where, they're working or living. And if they have already got a child in the nursery, but unfortunately, some parents may be disappointed because there may not be enough places. As you mentioned, we've seen 50% more closures in 22-23 compared to the same period in 21-22. So that really has had a biggest impact in terms of families being able to access high quality early education and care.
A large proportion of those closures were nurseries located in deprived areas. Arguably, the nurseries that are serving families and those children with the greatest need of formal, high quality early education. Yeah. So that has been a significant challenge. We saw last year, so my colleagues and I, Christie Co, we helped YMCA. YMCA announced a number of nursery closures. The nurseries they operated just weren't sustainable for them. But very fortunately, we were able to intervene ahead of that formal closure process commencing. And we were able to find a number of buyers that could take those nurseries on and maintain capacity. Because I think one of the biggest concerns during the forthcoming year, as we look ahead, is that loss of capacity. And as you rightly say, it's the balance of parents' expectations on being able to access high quality childcare and that maybe lack of available supply. What do you feel government and DfE and Treasury could do better to support providers nationwide?
I think any expansion plans need to be planned thoroughly before the announcement. And I think now is a case of actually the government has announced this, so they're expecting providers to make it work to support parents and children. And it needs, years of planning, particularly workforce, for example. The government are going to launch a workforce campaign. That should have happened 4 years ago, because in our survey, workforce survey, we've seen the level 3 qualified people reducing year on year. And of course, the kind of, staff retention rate and staff kind of movement has increased so much since COVID. People are leaving the sector, and we've got that statistics already. And the turnover rate is around 24 to 26% in the nursery sector, whereas on average, the turnover is about 18% outside. So that really, we've been warning the government about that for years, since the 30-hour policy started. So that should have been looked at, years in advance. And of course, the Education Select Committee have already kind of made some recommendations. And one of those recommendations is the workforce strategy, to have a long-term strategy. And that was actually not accepted by the FE, which is really short-sighted, So even now, if we start a recruitment campaign now to be able to engage with people, encourage them to join, that can take a long time. But the problem is here and now. So that needs to be addressed. And of course, the 3 and 4-year-old funding, that is the biggest gap at the moment. And even when the government announced the rates, providers still don't know what they're going to be getting from their local authorities. And there's no way they can plan ahead and say to parents that this is what we can provide you, or this is what the fee is going to be for the non-funded hours. They can't do that. So, that is very difficult to plan for any business.
Topic of workforce. So last year, NDNA announced the launch of the institutes.
Yeah.
As a sector, I think, traditionally, we have always spoken about challenges. But here, NDNA, recognising the challenges, you found a solution to the workforce challenges. So tell us more about your plans with institutes, please.
We've been doing quite a lot of research with practitioners, because, as employees, we probably know what we want for our staff in terms of their training and continuous professional development. But it's really important to talk to them about what it is that they want. And I think in that research, what was really loud and clear is that the morale is low, especially since COVID. And also they feel that they're not recognised in line with, the primary education, and there is a general acknowledgement in the society about the value of primary education. But when it comes to early years, there is very little awareness in general, because people think that our children go to nurseries and they play, And I think that the education element, the early education element, is really not very well understood by society in general. So as a result, they feel as if they are second-class citizens when it compares to primary school teachers or primary education. So what we're saying is that, in fact, through the blueprint, one of the recommendation is to actually, create that level playing field, so that they are recognized for the wonderful work that they do, particularly since COVID. Children are coming with speech and language issues and, behavioral issues, and they're having to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. And yet they are not recognized for their skills and expertise. So we felt that it was really important to not only raise their status, but to be able to give them that individual responsibility to take control of their own careers and their own professional development. And so for years of research, we've taken, the board have agreed to invest in this, and it's going to be a real kind of change for whole sector across UK, because this covers Scotland, Wales, and across UK as well. And in terms of finding solutions, it's no good complaining about all the challenges all the time, that we have to not only offer the government some of the solutions, because some of them are actually easy to do. And one of the things that came through very clearly is having that national data set for children that covers health, social care, and education, so that every child has got that recognized like a unique pupil number kind of situation. then, information can be passed on to providers, particularly with children with any special education needs. Really, really important to have that continuity of care and education. And that's something that we made a recommendation that we'll bring. That can be done quite easily because the system exists already. So, and the other thing, of course, is the Mass Champion program that we have now got a national rollout of that program, because the evaluation has proved that children from the deprived communities, it makes a big difference. And of course, the development is about, they are 6 months ahead, the children who've gone through the trial. So that has created a huge interest, and the Labour Party have already announced that they wanted to expand that program, and we're already rolling that out. So, and then we're also launching the PANCO program. The health and well-being and mental well-being for practitioners and for children is really important. So that's another project we've launched as well. So there's a number of new initiatives we're launching for the benefit of the sector and the workforce who work in the sector.
So the whole shift in the approach to business rates assessment, I know that you spoke to lots of providers that were really concerned. There seems to be no continuity around rateable value assessment. I know you've been speaking with Treasury and other departments on that. What concerns have been raised by members, and how have you been lobbying to try and make those changes?
I think we first heard about the changes in terms of how the local valuations have changed from based on space requirement to number of children. And we thought, hang on, is this just quite a unique thing to one or two local authorities? But we now hear more and more local authorities are taking the same approach. So I've raised this with the minister as well. But I think fundamentally, this is something, the business rates relief is something that the government must take on board. And again, the Select Committee report has recommended that as well. And we managed to achieve that in Scotland and Wales. But I think the important thing now is from this year, 80% of the childcare places will be from the government-funded childcare, in which case, if they're not actually covering the cost of that, because, we've seen Chancellor's already put up the national living wage to £11 per hour. And if you look at since 2017, when the 30-hour policy was introduced, the actual national living wage and minimum wage rises have been between 52 to 58%. And yet, the funding increases have been around 26%. So that is just one cost increase. But then on top of that, you've got the cost of living increase, you've got the business rates increase. This is what making it more difficult for providers to be sustainable. And that's why the recommendation we made in the blueprint is to have an annual review in line with any cost increases, because nobody predicted inflation to touch, double-digit figures. And yes, it's coming down, but still interest rates are at the highest at the moment. So a combination of all this means for small providers, it's been a struggle. And if you are relying on government-funded hours alone for your funding, then it's absolutely disastrous, because there's no way you can make it work. That's why we're actually asking for a long-term strategy, but to actually have an annual review in terms of the cost increases. And that, because otherwise, within a couple of years' time, we'll be back to where we started.
I think as we now look to the next 12 months, we can see that the cost of capital is becoming cheaper than it was, this time last year. But the business rates is a key topic. And I think we're all disappointed in the Chancellor's autumn statements when we heard that other commercial property sectors, pubs, for example, which, are a community asset, but equally nurseries in England are a community asset. They are serving communities, and therefore they need to be awarded the same degree of support, if not more so, given the importance of delivering high quality early education.
Absolutely. I think, business rates and VAT, and again, the government announced about £100 million of capital funding for expansion. And 100 million across 150 of local authorities is absolutely nowhere near what providers need to be able to expand or even extend a room, or even that, they'll have to pay VAT on top of that. So it's almost like giving it with one hand and taking it with the other. When we did a survey, as soon as the spring budget announcement came out, some providers, they already have got waiting lists. And so to take on more children, and some don't have space physically to do that. I mean, one provider told me recently that she actually bought a new premises, but she's having to close that down now because she has no staffing. And that is a very sad scenario, especially at a time when the government is looking for a major expansion. And they're talking about this being the biggest investment, which it is true, but it should have been planned properly and with a clear strategy. And one of the research reports highlighted that we probably will need around 25 to 26,000 more staff. Where are we going to get them from? And even, the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, has been quoted as saying, if Labour came into power, don't expect the public spending tap to be turned on indefinitely. In 22-23, £45 million of, early years funding hasn't been spent on early years. And I think that squeeze on budgets at a local level is going to cause the issue. So whatever the government announced as average rates, providers are not going to get anywhere near that. And that's why our local networks are really pushing that through the local authorities and through schools forums. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge in terms of the hourly rates, what they're going to get, and most importantly, whether they will cover the cost or not.
Another factor in that is you touched on SEND earlier, and we have seen a significant surge across the early years sector and indeed across schools and wider communities of a real surge in children with additional needs and ECHPs, whereby there have been inadequate spaces. And we've seen more and more requests of early years providers to support those children, but the workforce and the availability of suitably qualified individuals to look after and support those children and meet the child's individual needs teamed with this real issue around lack of funding.
That's why, the policy should be putting the child at the centre of it, because, the early identification, in fact, earlier staff are best placed to actually identify any needs or anything with children. They are the first ones to be able to identify. And of course, that kind of process of actually supporting them through those early years up until they go to school is really crucial. And I think also providers want to support those children with special education needs, but at the moment, A, they haven't got the skilled staff to be able to support them because a lot of them do need one-to-one care and attention, and B, they're not able to get the adequate funding from local authorities to be able to support. And again, this new policy is for working families, but there are children of parents who are not working who equally need that high quality education and care as well. So that's why we're saying there should be a universal element, but there should also be a targeted element, particularly in terms of children with special education needs.
The consultation we saw towards the end of last summer failed to address considerations around spatial areas. There's been lots of discussion about, the floor area required for a baby could be quite different to, say, a preschooler. And we've had conversations, I know, over last year about those spatial requirements are maybe over 40 years old, based upon the size of an old-fashioned cot. Well, of course, we rarely see cots in nurseries now. But that failure to consult against the backdrop of the government's expansion announcements, do you think that's been a slight oversight in terms of were that or had that been consulted on, and were there evidence for a change that in itself could have created some further capacity in existing settings at arguably a notional cost to support parents seeking more places, and also for those children that do have additional needs that might need a quiet area for a short time during the course of a nursery day?
It is a missed opportunity, definitely, because we have been saying that, even DFE don't know when these space requirements have come into play, and it's historical. And that's why, rather than putting a kind of, policy and sticking plasters on something that is not fit for purpose, we need to fundamentally revisit some of these things. And that hasn't been done as part of the EYFS consultation. Because now things have changed a lot, the forest schools and people have got a lot more open space, and, but it's not about just cramming children into a smaller space to create more places. That's not the issue. The issue is to actually how they can adjust during the day, how they can actually create that kind of capacity, but equally making sure that children who do need that space that you have that flexibility, So that is a missed opportunity. I think that needed to be looked at. And that's why we need a fundamental review rather than just kind of, expansion. And this is what's happening across UK with all the governments because, but before you do that, and what we're saying is actually, there is political consensus that it needs to be looked at. But I think sometimes politics comes in the way, in terms of making those decisions. And nobody wants to open that kind of worms and really revisit the fundamentals of putting child at the centre and what we need from early education care.
So looking ahead to this year, I can suspect a busy period for you, lobbying in the sort of preparedness for the general election, but also outside of that, 25th anniversary for NDNA. Obviously looking forward to a big celebration there and your annual awards. What else are you looking forward to in the year ahead?
I think in the year ahead is going to be lots of challenges. Of course, the economy isn't going to completely turn around, in one full sweep. We know that. And there will be challenges, like you said, at the local authority level. But most importantly, I think, through the Institute and through the programs that we're running, and of course, we launched the My First 5 Years Count campaign, and it's reached 130,000 people so far. And it's been a huge success. And I think, that for a small investment that we made, that kind of campaigns have really raised the bar in terms of the awareness from public in general, but most importantly for practitioners, and hopefully will encourage them to come into the sector to work in the earlier sector. So those are the kind of things that we will keep on pushing, not just lobbying the political parties, but most importantly, giving us and providing solutions to the sector, and NDNA actually delivering those solutions as well. So that's something, because the sector is very positive. Yes, we have challenges, but the people who work in the sector, a real big thank you to all of them, because they have done this for years on. And that's why sometimes I feel that people who work, civil servants, need to get out and actually go into settings to see what happens on a day-to-day basis, to really understand the kind of the hard work and the kind of work that they do day in, day out to keep children safe and happy and healthy and learning all the time, supporting parents.
I quite agree. And you mentioned that workforce video. That is a fabulous video. I mean, it really does give you a snapshot. It's just, it makes me smile each time I watch it in terms of the joy of practitioners, why they do what they do, and how much they get out of their roles. I think what also, though, resonates with me in that video, it's very positive, it's very uplifting. But in that final scene, you see the life of a practitioner and educator during the course of the day, from the moment they walk in the nursery and turn on the lights, to the closing scene when they turn off the lights and they walk out of the nursery at the end of the day. And I think that resonates with me, because actually, I think one of our fears for the year ahead is that we will see more nurseries turn off their lights and close their doors for the final time, unless there is direct action and positive momentum on workforce strategies, on raising the profile of the early years workforce, on funding, and on overall support for the sector. Because, as you rightly say, operators up and down the country and their teams do a phenomenal job. And the more policymakers and stakeholders that we can get in to see this work, on a first-hand basis, that's when true recognition will hopefully come through in wider funding and wider support for the sector.
Absolutely. I think it's already, everybody is saying already that the next general election will be a real kind of, clear point in terms of early education childcare will be the vote winner. And parents know exactly what they want, and they understand in terms of the value of early education childcare. And they've seen it throughout, especially people who've used the services of, providers. So that's going to be a decider in the next general election. So that all parties have to listen. There is absolutely no other way than listen to what the sector is saying and what organisations like us are saying, to be able to make it better and putting the children at the heart of their policy.
Well, let's see what the next 12 months brings. And I think we'll have a very interesting conversation when we catch up.
Absolutely.
About annual catch up at the start of January 2025. Thanks, Purnima. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you very much.